Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Green Bay Conservation Partners Spring Roundtable. The mission of the partnership of the Green Bay Conservation Partners is to strengthen collaborative efforts among diverse conservation stakeholders to support efficient and effective preservation and enhancement of the land, water, and other natural resources of the Green Bay and Lower Fox River watershed. This is our 7th Spring Roundtable event, the second one that we've done virtually. We appreciate everybody taking the time to join us this morning. We know how busy everybody is. We want to thank all the speakers that agreed to speak today. We've got a great group of speakers. We've got student poster presentations that were sent in the packet. Make sure you check those out. I really wanted to thank first the steering committee for the Green Bay Conservation Partners, but specifically the Spring Roundtable subcommittee worked really hard to put this on. A lot of background work went into it. So hopefully you enjoy this second virtual meeting of the Green Bay Conservation Partners. So I have the pleasure this morning of introducing Chairman Dahasi Hill, the chairman of the United Nation of Wisconsin. We want to welcome him here this morning to provide some opening remarks and give us some perspective from the Indigenous point of view as we get together virtually to share knowledge and learn about the conservation efforts that we're all doing in the Green Bay and its waters. And I want to welcome Dahasi Hill. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jim. Glad I could be here this morning. I was going to do a Gonna Hela Dungsla, it's our opening prayer, kind of kick things off here, and then I'll do a quick translation. Tauna Gonjokwa, Swunsioste, Ginate, Ohandu, Gonna Hela Dungsla, Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, and Yukinuha Ohanjage, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, and Ohnegano Sogo, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, and Onegli Suha, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Kahiundis Awahit, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Onunkwa Togo, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Oyunkwa U, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Asa Nate Godahundele, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Yahtigalondot, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Kundilio Suha, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Gonjokwa, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Ojita Suha, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Owela Suha, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Ladis Rayondese, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Yochi Stokwalu, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Yodahalot Sankojiha, G Sego, Inandewan, Jiro Harida, Tuyanduha, King Gwa, Nigol. Agwegos Kaji, Adwakwe, Nuni, and Gwa, Nigola Daitino Ladu, Nan Yuki sota hue nidale, G sego yunki nigola dari dats du haking guat nigol. Aguegos gaji do hue nuni and guat nigola daitino ladu, nen gaye nyungwe dage, G sego yan liwan jiro hari dats du haking guat nigol. Aguegos gaji do hue nuni and guat nigola daitino ladu, nen scanadalio, G sego yan liwan jiro hari dats du haking guat nigol. Aguegos gaji do hue nuni and guat nigola daitino ladu, Nain sunkwai disu, G sego ina liwanjiro hari datu du haking guatnigo dani. So thank you for indulging me and being able to speak my Oneida language and give our Ganahila Dunksla, our opening address. We do this when we gather as a people. It's, for me, it serves as a reminder of how we're all connected, not only the people, but all of creation. And so this prayer gives acknowledgement to all of creation. So I start with thanking Mother Earth, and then I move on to thanking the waters, the plants, the grasses, the medicines, our tobacco, the trees, the animals, all of the people, all the birds. And then I kind of move into what we refer to as the greater forces, things like the winds, the thunders, the sun, the moon, the stars, and then thanking the four messengers, and then Skanandalio, one of our prophets, and then ending with Sunkwai Disu, the creator, thanking him for placing all this here on the earth for life to continue. And then as I mentioned, the Ganahila Dunksla serves me as a reminder how we're all connected to nature, and that we're not the masters of this earth, but we are stewards of this earth. And so it is our responsibility as people to assure that life continues, and that we continue to help one another, and in turn also help all of creation. And hopefully, as we continue to be more awakened, I guess, to that responsibility to creation, that we continue to work towards revitalizing the natural environment, as we depend on the natural environment, as all of the animals depend on it, and the plant life. So we're all intertwined here on this earth, and depending on one another to do our own responsibilities, and ensuring that life continues and creation continues, and that we are all taking care of one another, kind of that symbiotic relationship with all of creation. So I'd like to say about that much for now. And again, thank you for the opportunity to address the Spring Roundtable. Yawako, thank you.
Yawako, Dahasi.
Yes. Thank you so much, Chairman Hill. That was wonderful. It was great to hear your native language, and also to ground us in that great message about, the place that we all sit in our, separate but connected places on this earth, and the joy we get to be a part of nature and all of the things around us. So thank you.
Hello again, everybody. We are pleased to announce today's opening speaker, Emily Tyner, Director of Freshwater Strategy at UW Green Bay. Emily is coordinating the designation process for a National Estuarine Research Reserve, or NERR, or NER, the way that we're calling it now, in the waters of Green Bay. Today, she will update us on the process and progress of NER designation and take questions from the audience. Emily.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Can you hear me okay? Great, okay. Well, yep, good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here and to be providing background and update on where we are with the designation of the Bay of Green Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. We're kind of expanding the name just to clarify that this is a regional effort. It's not just about the city of Green Bay, but it's about the whole estuary. Next slide. Oh, and as I forgot to actually introduce where I'm at. I'm with the University of Wisconsin Green Bay, who's the state lead on this designation process. And my role there is to, as Director of Freshwater Strategy, I focus on building partnerships both on campus and off around water and kind of water research and education. And then as the state lead, I'm the point person on bringing this designation to Green Bay and working closely with NOAA, our partner, in this initiative. So I don't really need to tell everyone here that the tremendous work of the last few years, actually decades, for Green Bay has been significant in terms of restoration and ecological improvement, the delisting of the Menominee River AOC, all the work on the Fox River, the Cat Island restoration project, basically everything that everyone here has been involved in. And that's just an exciting time. And so now I think as we're moving into the future of what our region looks like around water, it seems like it's a good time to be thinking about this initiative, which ANUR, what we think will bring people together around water. It can be a platform, coordinated research and education and stewardship and training. And so this does feel like the right time to be pursuing a designation. Next slide. The work of kind of getting us here is because of many partners, the ones listed here, and all of you on the call today. And that's really the platform for which we're moving forward. So I'm going to talk a bit now about what it means to have a NUR in our region, and then where we are in the designation process. Next slide. So the National Estuarine Research Reserve System is a partnership between NOAA and coastal states. The network of reserves there's currently 29 reserves with 3 in designation. Having a designation in a region brings funding for research and education and stewardship and training, and then lots of other collaborative opportunities. One thing I do want to emphasize is that with the designation, this is a non-regulatory entity. So whatever is already happening in the region with fishing or hunting or boat traffic, commercial boat traffic, all of those things are totally allowed with a designation. They're just written into a management plan as you move forward. So I think when the university was pursuing what would be a good option for some sort of convening force around water, a non-regulatory entity was a priority, and that's why this particular designation was pursued. The NUR system has a phrase that I like to talk about, locally relevant, nationally significant. And that really means that each individual reserve, so in this national network of reserves, each reserve is focused on local ecosystem challenges. So here in the region, that might be things like fluctuating water levels or coastal erosion, infrastructure, shoreline infrastructure, harmful algal blooms, emerging contaminants, things like that. But by joining a national network, we have access to the expertise of other reserves in the system, of those other 29 other reserves, also NOAA expertise, and it really helps elevate the story of Green Bay and the work that's happened in the Bay of Green Bay to a national and potentially international platform. The reserve system is known around the world, and I think some international exposure, so it just kind of helps bring and elevate our story. That was another exciting thing about joining this reserve network, is the opportunity to elevate and tell our Green Bay story. Next slide. So what does it mean to be a state-federal partnership? So this, as I mentioned, the University of Wisconsin Green Bay is the lead organization on this. The state's role in the reserve is they'll be responsible for kind of the land ownership and management. It's actually the state, not the university. It's who own the land. The reserve staff members will all be state employees. Program implementation, that kind of day-to-day programmatic focus, is all at the state level. And then 30% of the funding comes from the state. The partnership with NOAA means that we get some national program guidance from NOAA, technical assistance to access expertise, NOAA expertise, to join other reserves, to kind of learn from the reserve system, program coordination at a national level, and I'll talk more about those national programs that we'd be tapped into. And then significantly, 70% of the funding comes from NOAA. But there's no regulations because of the NOAA partnership, and no new management rules that come down from the federal government. Next slide. This is a map of the current reserve system, just to give you a sense of where the other reserves are. It's I think it's a 40-year program, so it's an exciting time to be joining now. The blue dots are established reserves. The red dots are reserves that are currently being designated. So we are actually going through this process with 2 other sites. One of them is in Connecticut. They're a bit ahead of us in the designation process. They have a site selected and they're writing their management plan now. And then one in Louisiana with Louisiana Sea Grant. And they are basically, we're in the same place they are in designation. They're also looking at sites and selecting their sites, which is where we are now. And I'll talk about that in a bit. So it's exciting to have kind of siblings in this process as we move through. And I've been talking to the coordinators of the Louisiana Reserve and the Connecticut Reserve just to learn more from them and about their processes as we move ours forward. Next slide. So some of the goals for a Green Bay NER, the first 3 here are kind of the big picture goals at a national level, what kind of all NERs adapt to. And then 4 and 5 are really what we want to focus here on with our reserve in the Bay of Green Bay. So the first one is that a reserve addresses coastal management issues through coordinated local and system-wide research. So the idea is to be a kind of a convening force, a point place to organize and think about research that's happening around the Bay and in the watershed. A second major goal is to focus on public awareness and understandings of estuary and coasts. That's through partnerships with K through 12 school districts, working with outreach organizations like Sea Grant, entities that are already out there, and really focused on kind of hands-on place-based learning. And the third is to be a partner with federal agencies, state, public, and private entities, again, to kind of help organize and be a central focus point for work on the Bay of Green Bay. Oh, I did fail to mention, though, that this reserve, although it's going to have a physical location in the Green Bay estuary, it will serve the Lake Michigan, Lake Huron biogeographic region. So NOAA sets out these biogeographic regions, and each region gets a reserve. So this reserve will have a large footprint in terms of working with partners and collaborators and other research groups, even outside of the Green Bay estuary. And then 4 and 5 here, one particular focus area that we have with this reserve is to take a holistic view of water and what those connections mean to people and communities. So that means kind of thinking just beyond the science and ecosystem connections, but the cultural, the civic, the historical, the artistic, and thinking holistically about how we connect to water and kind of trying to enhance and showcase those things. And then the 5th point here is this technology focus. We really want the Bay of Green Bay NER to be tech forward and to be thinking about the future of technology, how that serves and works in the region, and how that can help bring jobs and work and potential for students as they're thinking about their careers. To that point, we already have relationships with Microsoft, Titletown Tech, Exonus, a company that does sensor work, and Cellcom, to kind of start thinking about what a technology-focused NER would look like. And then at the bottom, you see these 4 focus areas. These are, the acronym for this is REST. It's for research, education, stewardship, and training. And these are the 4 sectors that all reserves operate within. So in fact, there's a sector lead at NOAA at the NOAA kind of high level that helps organize around that. So for example, within the research sector, each reserve becomes part of this program called the System-Wide Monitoring Program. It's SWAMP is the acronym, where at every reserve, there's a suite of samples that are collected, biological, chemical, physical, and that joins up with other reserve data from across the country so that NOAA can take essentially a pulse on the health of ecosystems estuaries around the country. Within education, an example of this is there's a program called the Teacher on the Estuary, where at every reserve, there's an opportunity for teachers to come for a 2-week training program for some hands-on coastal and estuary education. They can take work back with them to their classroom, and then there's a year-long opportunity to kind of stay in touch with those teachers to make sure they have the tools they need and answer any questions. So that's just an example. Next slide. Stewardship and training, this is a focus on technical assistance and providing shoreline managers and public officials with research tools that they need and education tools that they need to make data and science-informed decisions around water and coastal features, and it taps us into NOAA's expertise in these areas. Next slide. And then within research and education, the kind of main central focus area of a NER reserve will be a visitor center. This will be a site for classroom spaces, for a research station, for conference area, lab space, boat space, just kind of a central hub. And I do want to emphasize here that our goal with the Green Bay Reserve is not to, we want to be a collaborative force and not kind of mimic what's already happening in the region. So that's one thing we'll be thinking about as we move forward in the process. Next slide. A bit about the funding structure. So about $750,000 per year comes from NOAA, and the rest is a state match. In terms of the size of a facility, there's a range of sizes. Each reserve kind of takes on the size that fits for them. But the existing facilities range in from about 8,000 square feet to 28,000. So we'll probably find somewhere in there that works for the Green Bay Reserve. And then with the designation comes many opportunities for extramural funding, partnerships, and granting opportunities as you work with groups and agencies in the region. So we'd anticipate that about $1 million a year would come to the region just with base funding, and then there'd be opportunities for other granting with the designation process. Next slide. So where are we in the designation process? So it's a 6-step process. Here in the Bay of Green Bay, it kicked off in 2019 with a letter of interest from Governor Evers to NOAA. We're currently at step 2, the site selection and nomination phase. This is where we'll set up. Well, actually, I'll talk about that in a second. But once we have a site selected, the next major step is writing a management plan. That's also community driven. That's a process that will happen internally here, or collaboratively in the region. And then there's some MOUs that are established between the state and the land that the reserve is on. And finally, a designation ceremony at the end. Next slide. Our timeline is, well, we have 2 major kind of goalposts that we're working towards. The first is a fall of 2022 to have a site selected. And this would include the land and water areas and the built infrastructure. And then after that, once that's been established, the next 2 years is focused on writing a management plan and deciding kind of what the reserve will do and what that management looks like for the next few years. The goal for that is a designation at the management plan will be finished in August of 2024 with a designation later that year. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the physical location of the reserve will be within the Bay of Green Bay. Right now, in the site selection process, the committees are working to review kind of all the relevant coastal geography, and then next up will be establishing some site selection criteria. And actually, next slide, I'll detail what that looks like a bit more. This is our process for establishing our kind of sites, both our land and water areas and our built infrastructure. The work is overseen by 3 different committees, which are highlighted in the bottom in green. There's 5 key tasks that are laid out by NOAA. We're currently in the process of developing our site selection criteria. That's the Site Development Committee's work. And this is informed by both NOAA's, has some established criteria, and then we'll modify that to reflect local interest, kind of our local interest for what we want in a reserve. Once a site has been chosen, there's a process of delineating the boundaries and determining the kind of core areas and then some buffer properties. And eventually a final nomination document will go to the governor's office and then to NOAA, who will have to approve it. So the state puts forth a nomination, but NOAA actually approves where that site will be located. And that's our timeline at the top. Next slide. I think I'll just skip ahead. Sorry, next slide. I just want to show you here these are the kind of 4 major criteria that NOAA provides us in terms of what we'll be looking for with a site. And this is our jumping off point at the Green Bay Reserve to start thinking about what we might want for our reserve, our reserve structure to look like here. But they'll kind of all fall within these categories of what we would be considering when we'd be thinking about the site within the reserve area. Okay, next slide. So I do want to open it up to have some time for questions, but I want to say if you would like to learn more or kind of stay engaged, there's a few opportunities for that. One is just to sign up for our quarterly newsletter to stay updated on what progress we're making. If you're part of a group or a network that would like to learn more about the reserve, like a kayak group or a birding group or something along those lines, we're happy to come talk to you about the reserve. And then if you have a particular interest in being maybe more involved in the design and the the designation process, we are taking names to join one of our site selection committees, our site evaluation team. That's kind of names for nomination. Or long-term, and I think this will be a great place to work with the partnership here, is thinking about helping us write our management plan and what that kind of function of the reserve will look like. So there's lots of opportunities for engagement. Just email me and we can kind of talk through what level of interest you have if you want to stay more involved. Okay, thank you. And I'm happy to take questions if they've come up or just provide more detail if anyone needs some clarification.
Thank you, Emily. I'm not sure I was going to solicit questions. We're running a little bit behind. I will leave it up to thumbs up or thumbs down from Amy as to whether or not we need to move on or not.
We've got time for 1 or 2 questions, Jim.
All right. So yeah, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. I do see. Okay, so does this designation last for eternity?
That's a good question. Yeah, once a designation's in place, it's a permanent designation. We wouldn't have to reapply or kind of go through the process again. But what does get, reworked is the management plan. So every 5 years, NOAA asks us to go through and reassess the management plan. NOAA officials review it. There's an advisory board that reviews it. And that's just a chance to make sure that there's community interest and we're kind of managing the reserve in the best way possible for the times.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. How large will the Bay of Green Bay NER be?
Also a good question. Yeah, it hasn't been determined yet. So some of the smallest reserves in the system are 500 acres. That's the reserve actually on Lake Erie in Ohio. The largest is over 300,000 acres. So it's going to be up to the site selection committees to basically assess what areas we want to include and then what size is reflective of the Green Bay estuary and actually what can be managed both kind of in a financially and managementally feasible. So it's a process that we'll go through, but right now anything's on the table in terms of size.
All right, thank you. Thank you again. And we are going to move on now to the lightning talks. So if you're not familiar with the lightning talks, the format is there'll be 5-minute presentations with 1 to 2 minutes of questions if time allows. Please, again, submit questions in the chat box during or after the presentation. And thanks again to all the presenters for doing this and for being brave. So we are going to introduce the first speaker. It is Whitney Presby and from UW-Madison Division of Extension. And the title of the presentation is #Live from the Field, Lessons Learned About Virtual Programming. Whitney.
Thanks, Jim. Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about our Live from the Field series that we implemented last year in response to COVID. Obviously, we weren't able to gather in the field like we would in a typical field season. So we decided to use the platforms that we have through our Fox Demo Farms and Door Kiwani Demo Farms using Facebook Live. And the reason I'm talking about it today is because it worked really well. It was a great tool and something that we're going to actually continue to use as we move forward into some more regular programming this summer. So I wanted to share some tips and tricks. The first thing, if you are taking the time to manage a Facebook account, or if you're going to go live, I highly recommend utilizing the Facebook event, so providing people with the information, but boosting your content. Setting aside a small amount of money in your budget so that you can boost anything that you post. So you can boost an event, you can boost the video after the fact, but it just ensures that your audience is seeing your content. So highly recommend that. The second tip I would say is keeping the length of your program, your event, short. Get to the point, keep it simple, pick a single topic and just focus on that. When we first started, we thought, this is in lieu of our in-person events, so let's try to cover a lot of things. And our events were in the 25 to 30 minute ballpark. And honestly, this is too long for people to be able to pay attention. They're watching this on their phone, they're watching it on their computer, they're on Facebook, so there's already a million different distractions. So keeping it short and sweet is really important to be able to keep people engaged in that content. And if that means that you do more of them, just do more of them. But picking one topic and just sticking to that is really important. The technology side of things is really important as well. So this is probably the most time-consuming part of running a Facebook Live event, is doing tech checks and making sure that if you're going to be out in the field, you have high quality bandwidth so that you provide a high quality experience for your viewers. And so I recommend what we would do is we would go out to the field, bring with us, as many different devices on different networks as we had, bringing hotspots, checking that site, making sure that we had reception out there. And the other tip that I recommend, whether or not you're familiar with Facebook Live or not, I personally don't go on live on my personal account. So I wanted to be able to see what it was like. And so I created a fake Facebook page, gave it to just a small handful of people to be able to view this and watch what I was doing. But it really gave me an opportunity to try it out, see what worked, what it was going to be like. And then also when you do that tech check, instead of just going out to the field and saying, oh yeah, I've got a couple of bars, this should work, actually go out and go onto that fake page and try it out and see if it's gonna work, because you're going to consume more bandwidth than just sitting out there and checking your bars. So that should be part of your tech check as well. And then I also recommend investing in a microphone, so wireless microphone. If you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. I can provide recommendations, what we've used and what works. But if you're going to be doing Facebook Live or any other video work, making sure you have high quality audio is really important, and so it's worth the investment. And the last tip that I was going to share today is considering the weather. So I have sunshine and wind, one which probably makes sense and one you're probably scratching your head a little bit about, but the wind is pretty obvious. Don't try to compete. It's a really windy day. We did this and we should have just postponed it, because in a live event, you're at a specific location, so it's hard to find that wind block. You're not going to go back and edit this video. It would have been well worth it to just postpone and wait for a better day. Sunshine. So this is something that I was not expecting at all. Our very first field day was a hot, sunny day in July. Did the tech checks ahead of time. Was not anticipating my phone dying mid event because it overheated. And so we were scrambling. I'm the only administrator for our Facebook account. So I tried to log on to someone else's phone, but I have dual security. So it's sending a text message to my dead phone. So I had to try burying it under the residue and the corn out there. It was a little bit of a nightmare. So from there on out, what we did was just making sure that we had a backup phone ready to go so that we could log back on if we needed to, and also carrying an umbrella, having some shade out there. If it's a really sunny day, your phone does overheat. So really important. I think that's all my time here. So feel free to reach out. I think I have time for a question or two. And yeah.
Yes, you do.
Awesome.
Thanks. That was good. So Whitney, how much does it typically cost to boost a Facebook Live event?
That's a really good question. So Facebook requires that you spend $1 a day for however long you're going to run your ad. And it usually will tell you run it for at least 4 days to get the maximum amount. What we've done, we started out in the $5 range. We've bumped that up, and it kind of depends on what that content is, how widely we want it to be shared, how long it should be shared. But I would say anywhere from about $5 to $10 per post is a really good starting point. You probably are only posting once a week, so maybe you're looking at a $20 to $30 investment per month. So if you're going to go through that effort, I do really recommend considering that in your budget.
Excellent. Thanks again, Whitney. We're going to move on to the next speaker now. Our next speaker is Blake Newman from the Nature Conservancy, and he's going to talk about the East River Resiliency Collaborative, a watershed approach to resilience planning. Take it away, Blake.
Thank you. So I'm Blake. I'm here on behalf of the East River Resilience Collaborative. Thanks for the introduction. You are looking actually at a picture of the East River watershed. And if we could go ahead one slide, I'm going to come back to this one in a moment. But first, I'd like to just orient us to sort of the geography that we're talking about. So on the right hand of the screen, there you can see the Lower Fox River, the sort of larger dark blue channel, and the smaller, sort of slimmer dark blue channel on the left there is the main stem of the East River, with the Bay of Green Bay and Lake Michigan towards the bottom of your screen. So you may notice we're oriented sort of pointed towards the south at the top of the screen. And the light blue area in this flood model represents flood inundation from a storm event. And this is some work that Chin Wu, one of our project collaborators, has been working on to show where we might expect flood inundation during a storm event along the East River. And what he's modeled here is specifically precipitation, topography, and lake levels of Lake Michigan. And in the future, what they're hoping to incorporate as well is some other climatic factors into this, as well as land use and land cover. And they're going to run some different scenarios with this modeling in order to get information to decision makers and planners that will help to reduce the amount of uncertainty associated with planning around flood resilience based on these changing climatic factors that we can expect in the future. And if we can go back to the first slide now, just briefly, I'll explain why this is important. So as we look at this image of the East River watershed, you can see that it's a very diverse landscape. We have in the foreground here predominantly agricultural use, which is characteristic of the upper watershed to the south. And as we move north towards the Bay of Green Bay, we get more into mixed use, residential type land use, and then even into urban and industrial type land use. And so it can be very challenging working with such a diversity of land uses within the same watershed, and therefore with a diversity of different perspectives and priorities on how to manage within the watershed. So one of the first sort of things that we did in this project is launch a needs assessment where we spoke with a number of municipal officials, county officials, agency officials, as well as researchers and nonprofit representatives in the watershed, and tried to understand what are the limitations and what are the barriers to moving towards a higher degree of flood resiliency in the East River watershed, and what do these folks see as being the priorities for flood resilience in their communities as we move into the future. So that was sort of the second component of the project. And now if we go to the third slide, I'll talk about the third component. So the third component is addressing these vulnerabilities. So we're doing that in two ways, and this is sort of the next phase we're moving to in this project. One is working with the municipalities to help them identify and catalog the ways in which they are vulnerable to flood risk. And we're looking specifically at things like policy and public outreach capacity, as well as infrastructure and emergency preparedness to identify where some of these gaps or vulnerabilities might be so that they can better target resources towards these things. The other way that we're intending to start looking at this is actually a map of the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. And this has helped us to identify where greater socioeconomic indicators would alert us that populations may be vulnerable to these types of flood hazards. So over the summer, we're hoping to get into this particular neighborhood, the Joannes Park neighborhood. We're going to be looking at neighborhoods that have been sort of adversely impacted by flooding and that are more vulnerable than others. And if we go to the last slide, I'll just wrap this up. So to recap, the three things that we're working on and looking at are the uncertainty, addressing uncertainty through the modeling, the needs assessment, identifying where gaps in resource and knowledge are, and then identifying more specifically where we can address those vulnerabilities. And what we're hoping to do sort of through this project is to create a community of practice with flood resilience as the common binding thread, where folks can get together and share knowledge, share resources, and build capacity so that they're better able to address flood resilience as we move into the future and sustain this beyond the scope of the project. And thank you.
Oop, I unmuted, then muted myself again. Thanks, Blake. Let's see if we have any questions here. All right, seeing none, we will move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Lynn Terrian from the Lower Fox River Watershed Monitoring Program. And we're going to hear about involving classrooms in environmental stewardship. Take it away, Lynn.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for inviting me today to share how we're involving classrooms in environmental stewardship. The Lower Fox River Watershed Monitoring Program is a network of teachers and students doing water monitoring along the Fox River from Oshkosh to Green Bay. The program has been in existence since 2003 and currently has 8 high schools involved in monitoring 7 tributaries. The parameters they measure are things like dissolved oxygen, temperature, pH, conductivity, turbidity, phosphorus, nitrates, ammonia, stream flow, and macroinvertebrates. Our data provides insight on how runoff from these streams influence the TMDL, total maximum daily load, of the Bay of Green Bay. We work with UW Green Bay professionals to train teachers, educate students, and store data on a UW Green Bay website. The Lower Fox River Watershed Monitoring Project was started in response to the PCBs being dredged in the Fox River. Arjo Wiggins, a paper company that was funding part of the dredging, felt that education for the community was a very necessary part of the program and gave us the funds to get the program off the ground and running for many years. We now get support from local sponsors like NEW Water and Cellcom. All of these partners support educating young people about stewardship in their local community. Next slide. Not only do the students involved get experience in collecting data out in the field, but they are also participants in an annual student symposium held at UW Green Bay every spring. Here, the students present a poster or presentation on the research question they have proposed about the data they collected in their stream. Creating a college level presentation of this type is new to many students, but they love the opportunity to share what they have learned about their stream with others. Having college and community leaders in the audience help them keep their focus and give value to their ideas. I've heard back from many students about how much the symposium helped them in their college careers with making this type of formal presentation. In 2019, I accepted the role of coordinator for this program. I loved how I had seen the program grow over the years and how some communities were starting to use our data for environmental decisions. But I was ready to explore ways to get students involved in making more of an environmental difference in their community. Next slide. Sharing an office with Amy Carozino-Lyhan at the Biodiversity Center at UW Green Bay gave me the opportunity to partner with her on our newest restoration endeavor, growing wild rice in the classroom. This project is modeled after the Chesapeake Bay's Grasses for the Masses program that grows wild celery to restore the habitat in the Chesapeake Bay. Since we started this project in February of 2020, there were no wild celery tubers to purchase. These are normally harvested and available in late spring. So we turned to what we had available to us at the time, which was extra wild rice seed left over from Amy's fall seeding from her restoration work along the Green Bay shoreline. Our goal was to make growing wild rice possible in a classroom, involve students in its cultural and environmental importance, and then transplant the plants to parts of the Green Bay shoreline to aid in restoration work. As you can see here, we came up with a procedure where 6th grade students at Parkview Middle School were able to plant wild rice in 5-gallon buckets and grow them under lights in their classroom. Unfortunately, COVID-19 hit about a week and a half after planting and the schools closed. Amy and I rescued the plants and put them in the UWGB greenhouse until they were ready to transplant the end of May. Last slide. At the end of May 2020, Amy and I, along with 2 interns, transplanted 9 buckets of wild rice out at Barkhausen Nature Preserve in Swamico. We had some challenges with trying to plant these rather mature rice plants in deep enough water to support them, stake them down to help them root into the stream bed, and then protect them from predation. But all went well for our first attempt, at least for a few weeks. Unfortunately, some muskrats were able to navigate the chicken wire and feasted on our plants. As our follow-up, we hosted a teacher workshop in August to bring our planting procedure to more teachers in the Fox River Valley. This year, we had 7 teachers from elementary, middle school, and high school growing wild rice in their classrooms. We are still faced with many challenges. This year, it was seed germination, but we are confident that we have found a new way to involve students in another avenue of environmental stewardship in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Let's see, we have a question here. How are sites and schools added?
Pretty much, we started with the cohort of teachers that I had from my monitoring program and reached out to other contacts that Amy had with other water groups that she worked with. But now, as I'm out in the field and I'm working with schools for macroinvertebrates or whatever, I bring bring up wild rice to them. And I'm starting to network with Sandy Benton with Ed Ventures that works with the Green School Network, and we're getting the word out. We would like to train the teachers though, because we can't just plant wild rice anywhere.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, let's see. Our next speaker is Dave Wettenkamp from Brown County Land and Water Conservation, and he's going to talk about the Brown Road pike spawning marsh habitat creation.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, thanks for letting me talk about this, showcasing this project. First of all, I'd just like to thank all the conservation partners that have been involved in projects over the last several decades that have allowed a lot of the funding mechanisms, the advocacy, the permitting, and the grants that are coming into this area, and all the groundwork that they've done. That was the most important part. That has provided the vehicle for us to do projects like this. So I can name the many people that have been involved, but I mean, there's been many from the Green Bay Packers, Fish and Wildlife Service, NRDA funds from the damage assessments, Ducks Unlimited, Trout Unlimited, many conservation organizations like the Great Lakes Sport Fishery, conservation groups. I mean, if I started, there's a list, could be 40 people long, and also the towns and villages that allowed us to work within their borders. And most importantly, to the landowners that we've worked with over the years. There's been over 70 landowners that we've worked with since 2007 when the West Shore Pike Spawning Habitat Restoration Project started. And they're the most important piece of this, and they've donated their land and time and allow us to do this. And this is one such project I'd like to showcase. Was the major partners involved were Tammy Pioli from the Department of Natural Resources, and also Dave Helfman, Chuck Larscheid, who was just our previous pike manager, and then also Don and Patricia Zeller, who own the farm seen in this picture here. I guess it started with the survey and design back in 2018, and through working with the different partners, getting the funding ready for it. It was constructed in 2020 with the contractor Riverview Excavating, and everything went well. So I'd like to also touch on a little bit of the project as far as its history. The Zellers purchased the property back in the 70s, and they farmed it for 30 years and with beef cows and hay and crops. And when they were nearing retirement, they were approached to have this area developed, and they actually wanted to protect it. So it was sold to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources to protect it in perpetuity, and with with the grounds that it would be used for fish habitat projects in the future. And as you can see in this picture, this is from the flood of 1986, and you can see the area flooded quite extensively. So with that, I'll move on with the next slide. Next slide, please. Here's just a picture with the drone footage from our office showing the site in 2020. Just to give you an overview of how close it is to the bay. It's about a half a mile or so from the bay. The backup one. Here's actually a design plan view. Now you can go back to the plan view. Go ahead.
We're seeing it, Dave. I think there's just a delay.
Okay.
We see the plan view.
Okay, here's the plan view. It encompasses a 50-acre site. The Brown Road Ditch has been very important for northern pike spawning in the past. We've done projects on that. We've had issues with the small fry making it back to the bay, but this project is closer to the bay. As you can see, there's a 3,200-foot slough there that comes off the Brown Road and then circles back around behind that farm, comes back out to the Brown Road Ditch. There's a series of 6 scrapes that are various depths. They have islands and some structure in it. They're located and positioned in the landscape that took account of the different habitats that have grown since the land was let fallow for the last 20 years. And we have scrapes that will be inline, that are off to the side, ones that have drainage that come into them that will provide recharge to in addition to the Brown Road Ditch water. And all these different scrapes will provide different temperatures. And these temperatures will be, as the northern pike come from the right side of the picture here from the bay, they'll be able to choose which temperature water they want to spawn in, what habitat might be better at that time of the year, or given that the weather conditions. So that just shows you a little overview of the site. It's located on the intersections of Brown and Bayside Road on the Brown and Oconto County line. Next picture. And here's the finished site in October of 2020. So you can see there it is with the bay in the background. I can field any questions if you have any.
Thanks, Dave. Let's see here. Do you have any recommendations for working on conservation projects, with private landowners?
I guess the main thing is when you're doing your research or your inventory work is to get them involved right away. With this COVID stuff, if you can send letters to them, if you don't want to go and knock on doors, you can find addresses on Brown County's Brown Dog. If you're working in Brown Dog or any of your other county, find that information, send them letters and see if they're willing. Also knock on doors, trying to find phone calls. Be friendly up front with them, tell them what your goals are, and don't sell them anything that you can't, produce with the project. And I guess that'll go a long way in making sure your projects are successful.
All right, thanks a lot, Dave. All right, we're going to move on to the final speaker of this round. It's a pleasure to introduce Leah Zize from Oneida. She's going to talk about cover cropping with indigenous corn. Take it away, Leah.
Sagali swagwek, hat gahuni niu get sagwe huene, Leah Zize niu get so sunage, wagwaho ni wagita loda, oniota aga ni wagayuhun joda, dalagwane ni wagenyo. So hello everyone, I just introduced myself in Oneida. I'm Wolf Clan and I'm of the Oneida Nation. And I'm also part of a co-founder of Ohe Lagu, which is a cooperative of 15 families growing our ancestral flint corn for subsistence and cultural use. So you can see in this picture, this is a close-up of our corn, and it's actually braided up, and you can see the corn husk braid just in the middle there on the right-hand side. So prior to colonization, We grew this corn in a polyculture with about a 100-year rotation plan. So sorry, there's construction next door. Hopefully it's not too loud. With great results. So many of the early written records describe the sophistication and abundance of the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois agriculture systems. And in order to honor and walk in the way of our ancestors, we're working within today's constraints to uphold that philosophy of reciprocity with the land and to mimic the soil quality practices of our ancestors. So prior to the loss of our territories, we relocated our village every couple of decades and returned to the same place 100 years later. So if you can imagine picking up a whole village and moving it, and picking up all of your cornfields and moving those as well, that allowed the soil and the ecosystems to rebound. So the corn was also planted with her sisters, the beans and squash. And it's well known now that a polyculture like that is supportive of a more diverse and resilient soil microbiome. Today, we're implementing those same concepts by intercropping with cover crops and rotating our fields. So we're constrained now by the access to land. Our territories have been vastly reduced. The current state of our soils are also a constraint, and then of course the changing climate. So the field that you see here is one of our fields that we grow in. It was repeatedly planted in hay with no regard for the soil for many years. And so the soil is pretty degraded. And that impacts us now because when we get hit by late spring rains, our fields flood right away. And so spring floods actually destroyed about 90% of our crop in 2019. We've also been impacted by drought. We only started 6 years ago, and I feel like we're experiencing climate change. Every year we have a new challenge to deal with. So, and we're expecting that to continue to increase. We're expecting to see increasing frequencies of floods and droughts. And so we're looking to our ancestors for clues to improve our resilience. So we can't relocate our village every 20 years like they did back in the Longhouse days, but we can rotate our fields. So right now we're actually only planting 10% of our land with corn, and then the rest is in cover crops and hay. And so to imitate the polyculture of the Three Sisters, we're also experimenting with intercropping species, which means planting cover crops in between the rows of corn. And we've had some mixed results with that. And so this year we're going to be doing a white clover, broadleaf plantain, and chicory mix, which is a research project in partnership with UW-Madison and UW Extension. And then also a couple of other native farms in Outagamie County and Oneida Nation. So we got a lot of partners in that one. And so we're going to be planting that with the corn the first week of June. And then when we're going to harvest it in August or September in its green corn stage, will allow us to plant a fall cover. So typically our corn wouldn't be ready until the end of September, early October, which is really preventative to us from using the no-till method because you have to be able to get your cover crop in September, usually mid-September. So we're adjusting our harvesting practices, but green corn is still a traditional food for us. So we'll be harvesting just green corn from that field so we can get the no-till process started. So we'll plant in a rustic rye after we pick our green corn, and then next spring we'll crimp that rye down and plant right into it. So we're hoping to accomplish a few things with these practices. We want to improve soil organic matter, which will improve infiltration rates, and then hopefully that will absorb the impact of those heavy spring rains. Oh, you know what? I forgot to tell you to turn the slide. So if you can, oh, you're with me. Never mind, you got it. And so we want to sequester some carbon in the soil at the same time. So we're hoping with these practices of always having living roots in the soil, always making sure that we have a perennial cropping system, that we're starting to sequester carbon back into the soil, because it's really the bare soil that gives you issues with losing carbon that's locked in the soil into the atmosphere. And so we're hoping to be better climate farmers through these practices. And then we're going to be doing a number of field days to demonstrate these results to the community. So if you want to keep up with us, you can find us on Facebook. Oh, sorry. Our Facebook is facebook.com/amongthecornstalks. Yanko.
Yanko, Leah. Let's see. I believe we have a question. Oh, so what is green corn?
So our corn is a flint corn, which means it has a hard hull over it. Here, I have some right here. So each of these cobs has a hard hull, but if you harvest it in its immature state, it's still green. The cob is still green and the kernels are still really soft. And you can roast that and put it in a soup or eat it right off of the cob. So it's kind of like its sweet corn phase of maturation.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all the speakers of that round. All right, we're going to get going on our next round of lightning talks. And our leadoff speaker is Rena Bowman from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Hi, Rena. Managing botulism outbreaks at the Cat Island chain. Take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Hello, everyone. Today I'll be giving a brief overview of the 2020 botulism outbreak at Cat Island and the service's plan to manage future outbreaks. Cat Island is a beneficial dredged material project in Lower Green Bay. The site provides valuable stopover and nesting habitat for a variety of migratory birds, including federally endangered piping plovers, which have been nesting at the site since 2016. Next slide. Last year, botulism type C was first detected in dead waterfowl in early July. The outbreak quickly spread to several species of shorebirds and is the suspected cause of death of 1 adult piping plover and 7 chicks. To save the remaining piping plovers at the site, the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and Fish and Wildlife Service facilitated the relocation of 1 adult piping plover and 5 chicks to Illinois Beach State Park in the end of July. The picture on the slide there is one of the chicks that was relocated at its new site at the Illinois Beach State Park. The Wisconsin DNR estimates that at least 300 birds were impacted by the outbreak. Next slide. Botulism spores are now present in the sediment, making future outbreaks likely. Also, given the site's novel system, it's not a natural ecosystem, and habitat conditions are constantly changing as dredged material is deposited. Given those factors, it's unclear how much site-specific conditions contribute towards the outbreak in addition to environmental factors. To understand the driving factors of the outbreak and the likelihood of future outbreaks and any management actions that might lessen the likelihood of future outbreaks, the Fish and Wildlife Service will be working with a contractor to develop a botulism risk assessment and management plan. The plan will be completed in 3 phases over the next 3 years, with several opportunities for local partners to engage in the process. The first phase will be more of an informational gathering of existing literature, existing data. The second phase will be a data gap analysis. And then the third phase will be a management plan that will provide any management recommendations that the service or any partners can implement to help prevent any future outbreaks. Once completed, the plan will help inform management actions at the site and reduce avian mortality from botulism. Next slide. Any questions?
Thanks, Rena. Let's see what we have here for questions. How did you catch the chicks and mom?
That was led by Dr. Amy Wolf and Dr. Bob Howe. They misnetted the chicks. I think that was the first. There was a lot of expert opinion from around the Great Lakes as to how to catch the chicks and what was the safest method. This was the first facilitated migration of piping plover chicks. So in my knowledge, in the misknitting of piping plover chicks had not been attempted before. So it was worth the effort. I think we saved the remaining birds, but so yeah, very props to the University of Wisconsin Green Bay crew that they successfully pulled that off.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question. Are all birds susceptible to this botulism?
Yes, yep. It depends on what they feed on. So the botulism cycle. So when there's dead carcasses, there's invertebrates that feed on the dead carcasses, and then the birds feed on the invertebrates, and that's how they ingest the botulism spores. So it depends on what they feed on.
Gotcha. All right, we're going to move on. Thanks again, Rena. We're going to move on to our next speaker. It's Chris Collier from Trout Unlimited, talking about McDonald Creek, Oconto County, how partnerships are reconnecting a Class 1 trout stream. Take it away, Chris.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Collier, Trout Unlimited's Great Lakes Stream Restoration Manager in northern Wisconsin, and excited to share this project update with you all, and kind of a cool wrinkle here, because I don't think brook trout are what a lot of people think of when they think of species in the Bay of Green Bay, but looking at the watershed, the upper reaches of the watershed provide some of the most pristine and intact brook trout habitat in Wisconsin and the Great Lakes as a whole. So next slide, please. So McDonald Creek is a class 1 trout stream, which is the highest designation a trout stream can have from the Wisconsin DNR that indicates there's self-sustaining populations of native trout in the stream. And this stream, McDonald Creek, is located in Oconto County near the town of Klondike. A few years ago, Wisconsin DNR biologists completed assessments of road stream crossings in the area and identified this one, pictured here, as a complete barrier to aquatic organism passage, or more commonly known as fish passage, that could prevent species from moving upstreams, effectively blocking off 3 miles of class 1 cold water habitat that could provide important spawning and thermal refuge habitat for sensitive species like brook trout. Also, after identifying this fish passage barrier, further assessment showed that this crossing is impounding water and actually creating increased flood risks to surrounding lands and the road itself. The DNR approached the town about the crossing, and the town was on board at looking at solutions to solve the flood and ecological risks here. And with the town on board, approached Trout Unlimited, and then we were able to work together to bring on other partners like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to look at ways to improve this crossing and reconnect trout habitat. Next slide, please. So what Trout Unlimited did is we went out with the team from using our staff and Fish and Wildlife Service staff and shot a survey of the stream, which created something called a stream profile, which is pictured here. And this just kind of gives us a way to look at what's going on in the stream. And if we key in on the red circle you see, that's where the crossing exists. And you can see how it shoots up from where the upstream on the right-hand side is coming down. You see this stark increase in stream elevation, which is what is being shown here. And that's because the culvert was set too high, which shows why there is impounding upstream that's creating flood risks. And then you can see that really steep drop off. And that's actually about a 5.5 to 6 foot plunge pool right at the outlet here that is creating basically a staging area for fish that are trying to move upstream, but because of the velocities and the perch nature of this culvert, they can't move upstream. So it creates this bottleneck of habitat that effectively cuts off what is some of the best stream habitat in this stream. We can then use this profile, like I've just been saying, to diagnose the problems here. And this shows us that we have a culvert that's set too high. And then with our assessments that were made by the DNR biologists, we know that it's also too small. With the survey data in hand, we were able to identify the complexities of this problem, where initial preliminary designs looked at just lowering the culvert. We also determined that it's too narrow. And just by lowering it, we weren't going to solve issues with stream flow and erosion downstream. So with this hand, we went back to our partners and looked at a more complex solution that would actually have, while more expenses up front, more benefits down the road that would save money in the long term, effectively address both the fish passage and flood resiliency components, and just create a safer environment for the people that use this road, and then a healthier environment for our fish populations. Next slide, please. So where is our partnership going? Full disclosure, this is not a picture of McDonald Creek. This is a crossing Trout Unlimited worked on with the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, but it's a great picture of what we're getting to. Because of the complexities of this project, with the narrow existing culvert and high velocities and perch culvert, we needed to rethink our design. And going with a concrete culvert like this, while increases expenses, we're talking about a lifespan of close to 100 years estimated with using a culvert design like this. Whereas using the same design that's in the ground right now, or one slightly larger, might only be 20 or 25 years. So the long-term investment here, we expect to see an end product like this over the next couple of years. Right now, we're working with our partners to identify additional funding and get a structure like this on the stream that's going to open up 3 miles of habitat and improve flood resiliency, so the town doesn't have to worry about as much annual maintenance dealing with erosion and blockages of the existing structure. And with that, we can go to the next slide. And thank you for your time and any questions.
Thanks, Chris. Let's see what we got here for questions. Are there plans to continue these partnerships in other regional trout streams around Green Bay?
Yes. So my program that I work with, the Trout Unlimited, started with a heavy partnership with the Forest Service. And now that we've kind of got our feet under us and know how to manage these projects, we're looking at more and more projects throughout the Green Bay watershed, looking at towns and communities and landowners to address this. So if there's any projects out there or potential projects, feel free to reach out and we can look at what's going on and complete these assessments to know if there's something we can do to solve some issues.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see here. We have Nick Peltier from Brown County Land and Water Conservation presenting using remote sense satellite data to examine trends in agricultural land management. Take it away, Nick.
Good morning. So for the past few months, I've been working with a small work group of county, DNR, and Foxwolf Watershed Alliance folks using normalized difference tillage index, or NDTI, to look at farm field management. So things like tillage intensity, residue cover, and the presence of cover crops. NDTI is a comparison of near-infrared light reflectance data captured by satellite. The satellite data we've been using is free public data. It's just an internet download. Definitely available to the public. The analysis is done in ArcGIS using the raster calculator. NDTI for cropland are decimal values that range from 0 to 1. Higher values indicate more residue and less tillage. Lower values indicate more tillage disturbance and less or no residue. So looking at the map here, this NDTI is from December 9th, so kind of late fall after field operations are done in the area. I have the field symbolized that lower NDTIs are kind of that brown color, transitioning to the green for higher NDTIs. Thanks to whoever's pointing that out. So if we kind of look at the two circles, we can look at this from a spatial standpoint. The circle, the area I have circled, kind of that northern western circle, is an area with several CAFO dairy farms there. So a lot of corn silage is harvested, a lot of manure is incorporated with intense tillage, thus all the fields with the low NDTIs. Versus that southern eastern area I have circled, there's actually a GLRI project there incentivizing cover crops and no-till. So kind of a trend towards higher NDTI values there. If we go to the next slide, we can kind of see what this looks like on the ground. I have an example of a real low NDTI field there. This is a corn silage field, very low residue, probably only 5 or 10% cover there, intensely tilled, fairly susceptible to erosion. If we go to the next slide, we got the other end of the spectrum. That was also a corn silage field, but a cover crop was no-till planted in there and actually got a really good cover crop there. Very little soil disturbance there, and actually probably 70, 80, probably even 90% residue cover there. So that's really good. Next, if we go to the next slide, we can look at this a little bit differently from sort of a chart or a graphical standpoint here. So this is a histogram showing acres at any given NDTI value. So I got 3 years here going back to 1986 as a snapshot. All the same area, totaling about 250,000 acres here underneath the curves. NDTI is on the x-axis there, moving from lower NDTI on the left. Again, more tillage, less residue, to higher NDTI on the right, more residue, less tillage. So if you look at the red one first, is 1986. At that point in time, dairy cattle were fed primarily hay-based ration. The hay really dominated the landscape there. It's a perennial crop, not a ton of annual crops at that point. So you can kind of see that the bulk of that graph is or the bulk of the acreage at that time was sort of reflected with them higher NDTI values. Then in the 1990s, there was kind of a transition within the dairy industry, more to feeding higher energy corn silage diet. So corn is an annual crop, harvested in the fall, tilled in the fields are tilled in the fall. And you can kind of see that with that more prevalence of more acreage with them lower NDTIs. So I guess to wrap up, this is a really promising tool I think that we can use in the future for watershed inventories, both in the spatial and the temporal form. I also see this being very useful in prioritization to maximize water quality resources. So I think my time is just about up. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Nick. You have a couple questions. Let's see here. Does the range of colors represent the change over time or just current cover?
In the first slide, it's just current cover. So that was a snapshot from December 9th of 2020. So that was current fields. So the greener fields are fields with higher NDTIs that are probably either hay fields or fields with good cover crop. The browner fields are fields with lower NDTIs that are more intensely tilled and have lower residue. And there's kind of the spectrum all through there of varying residue cover and varying tillage intensity.
Okay, thank you. And another question is, can you distinguish between cover and tillage versus tillage?
Yeah, so we actually, part of the idea with this work group here is we've got a big field verification that's been happening this winter and kind of wrapping up now. But what I've kind of been seeing with that is what you can do is pick out like an NDTI value. If you know what the crop is on that field, it kind of can get an idea of what residue to expect. And really what cover crops do is essentially add residue from an NDTI standpoint. So if you can pick like a value where you know cover crops start, then you can use NDTI to give you an acreage of, so anything, you know, for instance, cornfields that are above an NDTI of, for instance, you know, 0.13 or well, that's kind of high in this instance, but you know, 0.07 or something like that. You know, that you could say that, okay, all those cornfields are cover crop, and then all that acreage has a cover crop planted.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, our next speaker is Katie Woodrow from the Fox Wolf Watershed Alliance, speaking on Lower Fox River Water Quality Management Plan. Katie?
Good morning. As most of you already know, work to reduce nutrient pollution in the Lower Fox River watershed has been underway for many years and has accelerated since the approval of the TMDL in 2012. Through the collaboration of producers and county land conservation departments, state and federal government, and municipal and industrial wastewater and stormwater facilities, and many nonprofit partners on this call, we're already making reductions to phosphorus and suspended solids in the watershed. However, with an estimated $500 million necessary to reach the agriculture load reduction identified in the TMDL, innovative thinking is needed to get from what needs to be done to how it will be accomplished. Fox Wolf Watershed Alliance, in partnership with Wisconsin DNR, Office of Great Waters, and Alliance for the Great Lakes, is developing a Lower Fox River Water Quality Management Plan, or more simply, a plan for watershed recovery. This plan brings together all invested stakeholders, breaks down silos, and lays a roadmap for collaborative work to reach water quality goals. Slide, please. The plan is broken into 5 work groups that each leverage experts in their field. Shared measurement aims to measure and report changes on the land and in the water. The water group is examining our current water quality monitoring while envisioning an ideal program for the Lower Fox, taking into consideration the potential for agency collaboration and targeted collection to maximize dollars spent. You've just heard Nick explain NDTI. This new measurement tool will measure the adoption of conservation practices on agricultural fields, which would allow for an efficient way to track the percentage of acres covered. These water and land measurements will provide a way to communicate watershed progress in a standardized, repeatable way. The implementation effort provides entities the ability to see how they fit into a larger strategy that will ultimately meet conservation goals and provides a priority plan for the entire watershed. The TMDL and 9 key element plans have set the stage, and the implementation plan adds a long-term vision, defines interim milestones, and continues to explore and share knowledge on best practices. While our efforts focus on agriculture, the work permitted entities are doing to reduce their loading to the watershed is integral to reach reduction targets, and their contributions will be included as we look to tell the entire picture. Funding could be the single greatest challenge we face in implementing conservation practices in the Lower Fox that meet water quality goals. With that estimated cost of $500 million, our current funding streams will not be adequate. This work group will evaluate current policy and funding, explore potential new funding streams, and develop strategies to bridge the gap to implement policies and generate funding that meet our financial needs. Because this plan is meant to be a framework for the long term, it's important to develop a process for decision-making that involves stakeholders across the basin. The governance work group will develop guiding principles and a decision-making structure that allows for adaptation and ensures accountability as implementation continues the next 20 years and beyond. Messaging and communications is creating channels to communicate scientific topics in ways that are easily understood by conservation professionals, elected officials, as well as the public, and engages the audience to be motivated to support conservation efforts. A brand name and logo is currently in development, and we're building our audience to learn more about how the public connects to the land and water in the Lower Fox. Slide, please. This plan is a snapshot of what we know now. As watershed partners, we acknowledge the TMDL water quality goals may feel out of reach, even with full implementation of conservation practices. The sheer magnitude of the work needed to meet these goals can feel overwhelming. However, we are determined to make a difference in the watershed now and in the future. We're committed to adapting our approach as we move through the process, pivoting as the science or policies or funding changes. We're flexible in our strategy, knowing that what works for one producer may not work for another, and things don't always go as planned. We are resilient, continuing to press forward even when it's difficult. What will make this plan successful is its ability to be adaptive to changing knowledge while using the best available science to begin making an impact now. Slide, please. It's our hope that this plan for watershed recovery that leverages the cooperative work of partners across conservation departments, local, state, and federal government, industry, nonprofits, and the public will be used as a model for future initiatives in Wisconsin. If you'd like to learn more or to become involved in our work, please contact me. My email is there on the screen. I also encourage you to help build our audience. The survey developed by the Communications and Messaging Work Group can be found on our website, fwwa.org/FoxRiverSurvey. Please take it and share it with your colleagues, community organizations, and civic groups you have contacts with in the Lower Fox. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. We have a question. Are you still recruiting volunteers with specific expertise or interests for various working groups?
Yes, we love to have as much input as possible by knowledge and experts in the area as we can. So if there's an area that you are interested in participating in a work group, please email me with your interests and I'm happy to connect you with those work groups. We'd love to have you participate.
All right, thanks again, Katie.
Thank you.
All right, our final speaker for our second round is Tom Presby from GEI Consultants, talking about an important bird area assessment in Northeast Wisconsin. Take it away, Tom.
Thank you. So over the last year, I've been working with the Wisconsin Bird Conservation Partnership to assess the 93 important bird areas across the state of Wisconsin. Might be asking yourself, what is an important bird area? And just in a nutshell, it's an area that's been designated through a nomination process as critically important for big groups of birds. And the dedication is through Wisconsin Bird Conservation Partnership, and then the IBA itself is carried out through National Audubon Society. So what we did in this project was basically assess all of the important bird areas. How are they doing in terms of how they deliver bird conservation right now? And then what's their potential for improvement for bird conservation delivery? And just to get this disclaimer out of the way, some of the outputs of this project are charts and graphs and stuff with scores. And this isn't a ranking. Obviously, all these IBAs are really, really great for birds. This is just relative to one another. So not ranking IBAs or saying good versus bad IBAs or anything like that. So what we did was develop a decision support tool, and these 12 factors are what go into the tool. And you'll see a variety of factors here, but they each have an assigned weight to them. And this is the weight that it has in the model that adds up to a possible maximum score of 100. So the higher the weight, the more important that factor is for contributing to the score of that IBA. So the factors that have to do with species, like listed species, climate risk species, those we got from eBird data, which is nice because that's up to date. It includes the breeding bird atlas, other recent inventories of birds. The spatial factors like resilience are from GIS data, mainly the Nature Conservancy's Conserving Nature stage data set. And then we have social factors like local involvement and threats, which we got from a survey that was sent to more than 200 people last spring. I know some people on here responded to that survey for some of the local IBAs. So thank you very much if you helped with that. So those were the different sets of factors. And here's just a look at some of the ways that you can interpret this data. Have a lot of spreadsheets and charts, which will be in our final report, where you can look at each factor, how the IBA performed factor by factor to see where there really is opportunity for improvement in conservation delivery, where IBAs might be falling short, where they're doing really well. But just in general, here's a look at the local involvement scores. So these are some things like how easy is it for people to interact with an IBA? Are people even aware of the IBA? And these are on a color gradient here. So red, orange, a little bit lower scores, green, a little bit higher scores. You can ignore the numbers because those just are with an IBA ID. But you'll see there's some that are doing really well, like Lower Green Bay, the land of the Menominee, some of the Lake Michigan IBAs, and then some with potential for improvement, like maybe the Wolf River Bottoms or the West Shore of Green Bay. Another thing you can do is, I have it kind of focused on Door County here, and the little white polygons, if you can see them, those are land trust properties. So if you were a decision maker for, say, Door County Land Trust, you could look at this data. These are the overall scores here, same color gradient, and say, all right, well, I have some resources that can be allocated toward bird conservation. Where am I going to get the most bang for my buck? And maybe you would want to use that in these yellow IBAs because they're already in a pretty good situation, but still have room for improvement. So might get some good bang for your buck there. Where some of the next steps, we're going to have a report coming out at some point this year. We're going to have regional workshops with a lot of our contacts for the surveys of the high scoring IBAs. So learning a lot more details from those contacts who know a lot more about these IBAs on the ground level. So I'm very excited about what this is going to tell us and help us for delivering bird conservation in these IBAs in nearby areas. So thank you. And if we have time, I'll answer a question or two.
Thanks, Tom. We do have time. Let's see here. Will the outputs of this assessment be publicly available?
Yes, they'll definitely be available. So like I said, we're working right now on exactly how to portray this to the public. Obviously, it's a little bit sensitive since, like I alluded to early in the talk, some people might mistakenly think that we were ranking IBAs against each other. But once we have the report published, it will be available publicly. Again, I think that'll probably be mid to late this year. That's up to the Wisconsin Bird Conservation Partnership Steering Committee. But before then, if anybody's interested in seeing how an IDA where they are or near them performed and wants the exact data, I can definitely send that to them. So it is available upon request before it's published if anybody would like to work with the data this year.
Okay, thank you, Tom. All right, well, that's it for our lightning talks. But before we move on, I saw a message. Aaron, did you want to address any unanswered questions that came in?
Yes, thank you. And thank you everyone for participating. We did have a few questions for several of our speakers that we were not able to answer live. So please rest assured we took those down and we will try to work up a question and answer document to post along with the recording from today's event. So thank you again for your participation today.
All right, thank you very much, Aaron. So next on our agenda is a legislative update, and I'd like to introduce Casey Hicks. Casey Hicks is the Northeast organizer for the Wisconsin Conservation Voters. Casey works with volunteers, activists, and partner organizations in the community to hold elected officials accountable for the decisions they make regarding our natural resources and works to draw attention to important conservation issues in and around Northeast Wisconsin. Today, Casey will be sharing a summary of recent developments related to water and policy issues in the state and federal legislature. After Casey presents for about 10 minutes, we'll have a few minutes for questions again. Please submit them in the chat box. And go ahead, Casey.
All right. Yeah, thank you all for having me today to speak to you about what's happening at the federal level and at the state level in regards to conservation. You gave a really good explainer of what Wisconsin Conservation Voters is, so I don't feel like I necessarily need to go into that. I do just want to point out that I have a little mistake on my very first slide here. I'm not going to be talking about Brown County residents wanting local government to tackle the threat of climate change, although that is important. But we can move on to the next slide, because I'll just give a little overview of just some of the issues that we're facing here in Wisconsin and that are particularly a priority for Wisconsin conservation voters when it comes to the legislature in the state and what's going on at the federal level. I think first and foremost, and I don't need to belabor these because we know these are all threats. It's climate change, of course. There's some exciting things happening at the state level, but really much of the action is happening at the federal level in addressing climate change. You all have probably seen the American Jobs Plan being released by the Biden administration, which is incredibly ambitious and a very, very large infrastructure package and jobs plan. For Wisconsin, what it would mean is being able to fund and push along climate initiatives that local governments and our state government have been taking up over the last couple of years. For example, here in Green Bay, the city's committed to reaching 100% clean energy and carbon neutrality for its city government and its operations by the year 2050. To be able to do that, though, is going to require funding. It's going to require expertise. And Green Bay is making good headway, but there are also several other municipalities in the state that have made similar commitments, but don't necessarily have the same resources as, say, at Green Bay or Milwaukee or Dane County or Eau Claire, which are a little bit further ahead. So one of the really great benefits coming from the American Jobs Plan is funding for cities, towns, other types of local governments, such as schools even, to really begin getting resources in terms of grants, bonding, and just money in general for retrofitting buildings. There's $100 billion in this plan for retrofitting schools, which is going to be important in our area. Green Bay Area Public School District is actually committed to reaching 100% clean energy by 2050 as well. There's also a lot of work that still needs to happen to begin reaching those goals. There's still a technology barrier in terms of battery storage when there is not peak usage in energy use. So there is $35 billion as well in the American Jobs Plan for technology breakthroughs in climate and clean energy specifically. And there's also another $120 billion just for broad research and development. That also includes another portion of clean energy. As well, transitioning over to electric vehicles is going to be incredibly important. And so there's about, I think $35 billion, if I'm remembering correct. Sorry, I have that incorrect. I don't actually have the number in front of me for the grants and incentives that are being put out there for local governments to invest in electric vehicle charging, but those are going to be out there as well. And so all of that is to say that what we are planning to do here is making sure that when this American Jobs Plan is passed, that Wisconsin's congressional delegation is aware that there's the need and opportunity for local and state government to take in these resources to begin making progress on their climate goals. And we know that if there's money and funding and resources available, that other local governments are going to be more likely to follow suit in creating their own climate goals. As well, another huge priority for us this year, and it has been for decades, is addressing Wisconsin's drinking water crisis, which comes in many forms, but I think the main three ones that we've been dealing with for the last few decades and in the last few years have been PFAS contamination, which is an emerging contaminant and is popping up much more in Wisconsin. Back 2 years ago, we had just a handful of sites that we had determined had been contaminated with perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Now we're at about 50 sites across the state that we're looking at, and Marinette and Peshtigo in northern Wisconsin is the third most contaminated site for PFAS in the nation. So addressing that, I think, is mainly going to be coming through the governor's budget at the state level, as well as the DNR rulemaking process that's happening right now for those types of contaminants. Right now, the DNR is going through a rulemaking process for 3 potential rules for PFAS contamination in surface, groundwater, and drinking water. They are all expected to be finished up in early 2022 to mid 2022. Where they're at in the process right now, they're doing an economic impact analysis. And this summer, they are going to be taking in comments from the public on their proposed rules for standards. A similar action is happening right now with nitrates as well to reduce nitrate contamination in people's private wells. About 2/3 of people in Wisconsin get their drinking water from private wells. And there's another huge crisis when it comes to over-application of manure and nitrates getting into people's drinking water. So NR 151, which is a current rule from the DNR that is governing when and how much manure or fertilizer can be put on an area that is sensitive to groundwater, taking up nitrates from that over-application. Right now, that's mainly in the northeastern part of the state around the Niagara escarpments, but they are working to expand NR 151 right now to other sensitive areas in the state, such as the southwestern part of it, in Iowa counties, for example. That process is pretty much in the same timeline as the PFAS rulemaking. It can expected to be finished up in about 2022. They are currently doing their economic impact analyses, and then this summer they're going to be also taking in that public comment. The other opportunity for addressing drinking water in the state is coming in the form of the governor's budget. There's quite a few different budget items in there that are going to be starting to get at the root causes of these issues. But what the budget will actually look like by the time it gets through the Joint Finance Committee here, they're holding their budget hearings. And once it gets to the state legislature and back to the governor's desk, is very much up in the air. But right now, what we've seen in the budget that was put out by the governor that's promising is having 11 additional full-time staff at the DNR dedicated to understanding and addressing the threat of PFAS, as well as $2.11 million in statewide testing and monitoring of PFAS in both private and municipal wells. As far as nitrates and agricultural pollution goes, there's a proposed $10.9 million for county conservationists to help with monitoring of nutrient management plans, changing the qualifications for households to receive grants to replace contaminated wells, as well as increasing the amount for the well grants compensation program to $2 million. And also, I neglected to mention this a little bit earlier, but lead, of course, is also a huge issue in Wisconsin. We overall in the state have a little bit higher of an average of lead poisoning in children than the entire US. So in the governor's budget, there's $40 million in bonding to replace lead service lines through the Safe Water Drinking Loan Program. So that's clean water. And then the last thing I just want to touch on quickly is public lands, because there's exciting things happening both at the federal level and state level to address public lands. So at the federal level, the Biden administration had just put out the 30 by 30 initiative through an executive order back in January. The goal of that is to conserve 30% of America's lands and oceans by the year 2030 by directing the Department of Interior to work with state and local governments, as well as local conservation groups, tribal nations, and even private landowners, private land trusts, to make sure that we're setting aside lands to reach that goal. And that's really going to come through both small and large swaths of land to actually reach that goal. The US is going to have to set aside land equivalent to the size of Texas to actually start reaching that goal. Right now, we're further along in terms of protecting oceans. There's about 23% of America's oceans that are strongly protected, but only about 12% of lands. So there's some more work to do there. One of the other ways that the US is going to be achieving that is by putting a pause on new leases for oil and gas exploration right now, which is in effect. One of the other things that was brought up in that executive order and is also in the American Jobs Plan is establishing a climate conservation corps for similar to the New Deal program back in the 30s to have young people and people across the US helping to preserve and conserve land. And then lastly, for the public land section of this, 2 years ago, during the last budget cycle, the governor's proposed budget only had a 2-year reauthorization for the Knowles-Nelson Stewardship Program, which is the main program that Wisconsin uses to set aside land for parks, hunting lands, even things like boat launches and very small infrastructure projects. So in this current budget cycle, that was put back into the budget to reauthorize for the full 10 years that it is normally reauthorized. And to get closer to full funding for it, the governor's budget has $70 million allocated for it. If I'm remembering correctly, full funding for that program, I think, is at about $86 million a year. So it's been continually rated over the last decade and not fully funded, so that other programs could be funded. But looking forward, that is a budget item that we think is probably not going to be stripped out. The funding levels will probably be changed a little bit, but for the most part, that should still stay in there. Those are all my updates. And what I really just want to say before we get to questions quickly here is that for the American Jobs Plan, that is going to be a huge priority to funnel resources back. There's a handout that I believe all of you should have that has contact information for US senators in Wisconsin, as well as Wisconsin's representatives. And if you're in the northeastern part of the state here, Mike Gallagher is going to be the best person to contact since he's our congressman here. But yeah, I would just encourage you to reach out to them, show them your support for the American Jobs Plan, as well as, the 30 by 30 plan as well, because that's going to be important for connecting local governments up to the federal level and the Department of Interior to start working towards that goal. But that's everything I have, so thank you.
All right, thanks, Casey, for the update. We'll take time for one quick question here. So did Brown County and or Green Bay pass a climate change resolution?
Yes, Brown County passed a resolution on March 17th on a vote of 19-5. It's a little bit more limited than what Green Bay has done. The Brown County resolution is for 100% clean energy, but there's no date attached to it, unfortunately. But they are creating an energy subcommittee to begin developing a plan to reach that goal and build it out a little bit more and attach a date to it. For Green Bay, 2 years ago, Mayor Eric Genrich made a proclamation that the city would become committed to 100% clean energy and net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050. I believe as well, there was a work plan that was passed by the Sustainability Commission of Green Bay a little bit prior to that also technically made the city committed to that goal as well, but the mayor doubled down on it.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, our final speaker today is Betsy Galbraith. Betsy is the Green Bay Conservation Partners Blueprint Liaison and biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Betsy will share an update on the development of the Green Bay Landscape Blueprint and the implementation plan. Betsy, take it away.
All right, thank you, Jim. Does my audio sound okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm excited today to share the results from the Blueprint project. It's been about 4 years in the making and culminates a lot of hard work by all of you, the Green Bay Conservation Partners membership and many different partner organizations, over 50 different organizations that contributed to this effort. Next slide, please. So why does the very busy Fox Wolf Green Bay landscape need an overarching conservation plan? I wasn't a believer at first either, and I'm certainly not a conservation planner, but as I dug into this project, I right away realized the benefits of coordinating conservation at the landscape scale and strategizing and thinking about the future of conservation for the watersheds we work in. We have an extremely busy conservation landscape. I'd argue one of the busiest in the Great Lakes, and